Zarkota, the home of the 468th Separate Rifle Battalion, 110th Mechanized Brigade, and here we see a Russian T-80 BVM going in search of prey. It takes a long drive from the wastelands of the Grey Zone and into the depth of Ukrainian defenses south of Avdiivka. With an engine power of 1,250 horsepower, a maximum road speed of 70 kilometers, and a range of 500 kilometers. This is the optimal death machine for this mission. The tank goes from its safe positions beyond the front line into Ukrainian-held territories, deep into them to hit the industrial sector. What we see is this tank attempting to achieve advantages by going beyond enemy lines and trying to hit them from behind. Using its advantage in speed and armor as well as firepower, it tries to give the Russian forces an advantage here in the south of the city. However, not much was really gained in that assault as the Russian forces just went in, hit some targets and went back out. But what we do see is here to the southeast of the city, the Russian forces storming the industrial sector here managed to capture a few buildings and territories through the trenches located here in the southeast of the city. As for the northern parts of the city, we see how the Russian forces managed to take control of the waste sorting plant here to the northeast of the city, south of the waste heap here in the north, and we see that they managed to advance here in the eastern parts west of Kamyanka in the northeastern parts of Avdiivka. So we're seeing some Russian movement here in the northeastern parts. In the northern parts of the city, we also see that the Russian forces managed to advance northwest of Avdiivka. We're seeing that they're getting closer and closer to this location that is supposed to become their front line by the railways, as that is what they are looking to get due to the defenses gained by the forest lines through the railways. So we're seeing that the Russian forces are trying to advance here in the northwestern positions. If we take a look at Deep State Maps map, we actually see that they reported further advances by Russian forces than what Syriac has reported. So with this, we're seeing that the front line is closing in on this location here by the railways. There's also the possibility that they're looking for something further north by the south of Novokalinova rather than the railways, as we see that there's this straight line of forest patches here in the northern parts. And we also see that they managed to advance north of the railways, north of Krasnoyarivka, which could indicate the intention of advancing further in this direction. Moving further north in the direction of Horolivka, we actually see here that the Ukrainian forces launched an attack here in this direction that hasn't been launched since the start of the war. This location is the 2014 zone of the ceasefire that happened in between the Ukrainian and Russian forces. So this is a heavily fortified area. The Ukrainian forces didn't manage to advance, but they managed to enter into and beyond the Russian defensive lines before they were pushed back. So the Ukrainian forces got initial success, which is something that hasn't been seen in this area since 2014. So this is a worrying indication for the Russian forces and a big success for the Ukrainians, because they're able to advance through the fortifications of Russian forces if they aren't properly up to standard. This is similar to the situation in the Dnieper River area, where the Ukrainian forces managed to get a foothold, despite it being over a river line. This is embarrassing for the Russian defenses in the area, because they have this whole river line that they're able to hold back as a defensive line against the Ukrainian forces. Yet the Ukrainian forces still managed to get a foothold. This shows that they've learned something from the months of speedboat riding across the river line. The Ukrainian forces still hold these locations across the river line, but Russian forces are pressuring the Ukrainians now, trying to regain control over the area before they get a proper foothold. As for the northern parts in direction of the Luhansk-Kharkiv border, we actually see here that the Russian forces restarted operations with the 1st Guards Tank Army attacking in the direction of Kislivka and Kotlyarivka. So we're seeing here that the Russian forces are increasing their pressure all across the front line, majorly focused around the Donetsk region and the Kharkiv region. But we're not seeing really that much in the Zaporizhia front. There's a lot of inactivity. That's why I decided to take a look at the weather. This is just one out of many places, but as we can see, it's just rain all through. This is the standard weather in November in European countries. And actually, as a side note, Denmark has had an incredible amount of rain this month, to the point that we may hit the most rain in a single year ever since it was first recorded. Hello and welcome back to another update. As we cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war, we have to look at the Avdiivka direction, where we now see that there is a lot of pressure on the Russian side trying to advance, and advance they have managed to do over the past 24 hours. We see that they managed to advance west of Kamyanka. This is significant because we have seen a previous attempt by the Russian forces to try and gain control over the area here in the western parts of Kamyanka and east of the coke plant. Here we see that the Russian forces managed to get the waste sorting plant here on the eastern side of the coke plant, and with this they're able to hold the flank of the Ukrainian positions here to the east. So we're seeing that the Russian forces will likely try a pincer maneuver from both of these locations with cover fire from the waste sorting plant and an assault from the eastern side to try and gain control over the area. If the Russian forces manage to gain control over this area here to the north of the lake, they may be able to launch assaults to the northeastern parts of the city. This combined with the fact that they captured the waste sorting plant here in the north, which would make it easier for the Russian forces to launch assaults towards the coke plant. And with the advancements here to the north of the coke plant, they may start a pincer maneuver in that direction as well. We also hear reports that are unconfirmed so far of the Ukrainian forces leaving Stepove. This would make sense, as if they did do so, they would be out of the direct fire range of the Russian forces, and they would still be able to shoot directly into Stepove itself, as if the Russian forces were to advance into it, they would be leaving them in a vulnerable situation. So the Ukrainian forces would be strategically smart to give up the village and leaving it as a gray zone. And taking a look at the southern flank with the Russian advances in the industrial zone, we can see that this is a heavily fortified area with trenches going all over the place. And the fact that they managed to advance this amount of distance shows that the Wagner forces aren't just for fun. We have seen the re-entrance of the fighters who actually are willing to storm fortified positions, unlike the Russian forces who seem to wait around and drive around in tanks, going through industrial zones and going back out, with really no territory gained, but maybe an advantage gained through the firepower of the tank. So we're seeing that there's a lot of changes throughout the front line. However, the most important one is that the Russian forces continuously try to advance despite the bad weather, despite all of these Ukrainian fortifications in the area. And unlike the Ukrainian offensive, which had the goal of cutting the Zaporizhia front down all the way to the Sea of Azov, we instead see that the Russian goal is just to take Avdiivka and nothing more. With that, they have an easy time to just use all they have to just gain this one city and draw it as a victory. On the contrast, the Ukrainians managed to capture Robotyne and nothing more. As such, they cannot really draw any type of victory on this part of the front line. So choosing a smaller target is actually strategically viable, because if you do not believe you can overperform, then just keep the goals at your level. Ukrainians, aim high, go big or go home. The Russians, let's just take whatever we can and call it a day. And finally, taking a look at the Kharkiv-Luhansk border, we see that the Russian forces restarted attacks towards Kislivka and Kotlярivka, which is this twin village right here. We have been talking about this for quite a while because Russian forces, despite multiple attempts, have never been able to actually take control of the area. And they have a significant force here. The Ukrainians have a significant defense, but definitely on a lower level than what is present at Avdiivka. This raises the question, why is Russia so heavily struggling to get this? It is likely that they're not actually assaulting it, but rather using direct fire. If they move in from their backline positions just to shoot at the Ukrainian positions, then they will slowly weaken down the Ukrainian positions and try to inflict casualties while trying to avoid their own, but no actual assaults towards these positions. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.